Hi, I'm Mary Sue Rominger, and I'm on the Board of Directors for the Bateman Horn Center. Welcome, and thank you so much for coming tonight. And thanks to those of you who are joining us via live stream. We will be posting a video of tonight's presentation on our YouTube channel within the next few days. Our speaker tonight is Heather Jarman, and Heather will be talking about exploding the myths of chronic illness and family life. She has a daughter who has ME/CFS POTS, and before her daughter's illness, Heather was a freelance fiction writer and editor. She published several novels in the Star Trek Deep Space Nine, Star Trek Voyager, and Starfleet Corps of Engineers series. Her university studies include English literature and modern history, but interestingly, it was her passion for science fiction that gave her the ability to study the complexities of ME/CFS and help prepare her for having a child with such a poorly understood, complex, multi-system illness. Using her writing talents, Heather recently wrote a blog for the Bateman Horn Center titled Parenting a Child with ME/CFS, which can be viewed and downloaded from our website. Please welcome Heather Jarman.
Okay, I'm gonna have to go old school tonight. I believe whenever I come to Utah, it's like I'm one of the horsemen of the apocalypse because everything seems to go wrong whenever I come to town. I got here a few weeks ago. My daughter was getting married for the first weekend in 3 months. It rained. When she was having an outdoor wedding, I had to get on an airplane the next day. My daughter was supposed to have a baby tomorrow. She had the baby yesterday. I've been chasing 2-year-olds all day. So as a consequence, I have to rely on my pad and paper tonight instead of doing the PowerPoint presentation that I spent a lot of time on but wasn't able to finish. So please be patient with me as I have to refer to my notes. The only thing that qualifies me for being able to stand here is the fact that I have a child with chronic illness. And when I talk about chronic illness, I am talking about any child, adolescent, young adult who has a multi-system, poorly explained illness that defies definition. This can include dysautonomias, POTS, rare genetic diseases, ME/CFS, other autoimmune diseases that are hard to pin down. My daughter started getting sick in 2013 in her junior year of high school. She wasn't officially diagnosed with ME/CFS until February of her senior year, and originally was diagnosed at the Royal Free Hospital in Hampstead in London, which is ironically where the first major ME/CFS outbreak happened almost 40, 50 years ago. Unfortunately, as soon as they prescribed Valium and protein shakes, I should have known that we were in for a rough go. Thankfully, not 2 months later, we were able to meet with Dr. Bateman at the Bateman Horn Center, and she provided us a lot more clarity and understanding and gave us a lot of information going forward. But as all of us with children with chronic illness know, a lot of this journey has to do, I shouldn't use that word journey, because my very first thing is about how illness is not a journey. A lot of this process is learning how to find information on your own, make the most of the information you get from the doctors, and go forward. So I will be talking a lot about my daughter, Abby. She is the patient in question. She has given me permission to talk about her. I tried to protect her anonymity, but at the end of the day, it's too hard to talk about her and not refer to her by her first name. So I'm talking about some of the myths of parenting and having a family with a child in the midst that has chronic illness. Now the first myth I want to talk about is the exact word that I use, that we tend to use quite a bit when we're talking about illness. And that is, illness is a journey. And I'm going to refer to this a lot because illness is a journey. This is a myth. When you're talking about a child with chronic illness, illness is not a journey, illness is a roundabout. Now, I don't know if any of you have ever had the experience of driving roundabouts. They don't exist a lot in Utah. The first experience I had was when my then fiance was taking me driving through the rich countryside, and I was trying to learn how to drive on the opposite side of the road, and we approached a roundabout, and it was positively terrifying. So a roundabout, if you don't know what they are, is a circle that you would enter in a car and start to go around, and then there's exits that come off all the edges of the roundabout. In the UK, it's a very popular traffic control mechanism, and there's one place that we visited that had no fewer than 6 circles and 38 exits coming off of it. So I say that chronic illness is a roundabout because once you enter, there are so many different places you can go with it that there's not a point A to point B kind of definition. Especially when you have a child who may wander in the chronic illness realm for long periods of time without a definition. My husband my then fiance, he's now my husband, explained to me that if I wasn't sure how to navigate the roundabout, I could enter the roundabout here and then go around this hub. And as long as I circled the most inner lane of the hub, I was okay. And I could stay in that lane indefinitely until I figured out what direction I was going. This was before Siri and GPS and a little voice telling you where to go. So you pretty much had to be able to read a map. And when you're driving a car, it becomes really scary. So I would hug this inner hub and keep going around and around and around until I figured out which exit to take, and then I would spin off. Now the reason why chronic illness is circular, not illness, not linear, is because we humans like things linear. We like things beginning, middle, and end. We like our quest stories to have clean rising and falling action. So in our case, it is the child gets sick, which is the beginning of Act 1, and then family pursues every option. They see poor doctors, they have setbacks, they have accusations of faking it and failed treatments. And then we come to the end of Act 3, where there will be one last attempt to fix it. This is usually when Dr. House pops in with some really crazy idea about some rare form of parasite that comes from a fly in the middle of Africa. So there'll be one last minute shot, and then at the very last minute, everything is fixed. And then we live happily ever after. Unfortunately, with chronic illness, this is not how it works. It works like this, where we start in the roundabout and we go around and we go around and we go around. And sometimes we get off and sometimes we come back in. And we never know, because every person with chronic illness has a different process. Now the reason why I believe this is a myth that needs to be exploded when it comes to family life is that this idea that somehow there's this linear journey paralyzes us. It prevents us from living our lives because we wait until someday to make a decision. The challenge of making the wrong decision exists. Doctors, treatments, jobs, geography. And so we want to stay where we are. We want to stay safe. And so as long as we cling to this idea that everything is going to follow a certain pattern, it prevents us from having to move forward. The reason why I thought of this specifically is my husband. My husband hates anything medical. He refuses to go to doctor's appointments. When my children were small, I was the one that took them to the emergency room, took them to all their visits. So leave it to him to have his youngest child come down with a serious medical problem, which he can't understand at all. If you were to ask him to explain technology or anything regarding Silicon Valley or computer chips, he can tell you in and out exactly what to do. But if you ask him what a hematocrit is or what a blood count is, he has no clue. So he's currently going through a very typical midlife crisis with his job. And even just a few nights ago when we were talking on the phone, he said, I'll make a decision about my job when we better understand Abby's situation. I've been hearing this for 3 years. We are 3 years into Abby's situation, and we are no closer to finding an exit off this roundabout than we were when we started this journey. Surely medical insurance is a golden handcuff, and he feels it very keenly because he works for a Fortune 100 company and the benefits are outstanding. But there's a difference between avoiding procrastinating decisions because we honestly don't know, which is the hugging the hub that I talked about in the beginning, versus the paralysis of expectation that somehow something's going to come in and fix things. when I was half awake the other night waiting for my 2-year-old granddaughter to wake up, I wrote this down, and I'd like to read it the way I wrote it. I said, at some point we have to make the choice to act because it is the correct choice at the right time and not out of some misguided belief in supposed to be timing or belief in a false narrative. If the lack of closure presented by your options makes you crazy or anxious, change your goalposts, move your end zone. Your story is only your story, not a story made for TV or an inspirational post on the Huffington Post. If you do that, you will start to recognize the little victories and the smaller, self-contained paragraphs that have beginnings, middles, and ends. Because when you have a child with chronic illness, that's the only way to take your life back. Your life is what happens when you're sitting in the car going around the roundabout. It is the small things. You may not be able to plan for that cruise 6 months from now or put a deposit down on that dream European vacation, but maybe you can set a target for getting your kid out of the house and going down to her favorite ice cream or donut shop or taking a walk around the park. And that is living your life. It is making a choice to move forward without knowing what the end is and being okay with it. So that's why I wanted to start with the idea that illness being a journey is a myth that we need to walk away from when we have a child with chronic illness. Now this one is one that all of us should recognize if we're sitting here, and that is the myth of the parent caregiver as superhuman. And the caveat I would add to this is, do I really need to explain what that means? I have yet to meet a parent when confronted with a child's illness that is not willing to do everything possible to help their child. There is a unique component to being a parent caregiver that differs from the usual societal pressures of behavior, success, and appearance. Adding to the guilt you might feel for not exercising or losing 10 pounds is a pressure to fix your child's problem. Our sick children need us in a way that they haven't since they were babies or toddlers. It's easy to talk about self-forgiveness and compassion when your biggest guilt trip is being 15 minutes late for a soccer practice pickup. It's another when your essentially housebound invalid child is thrust into having to manage a situation they simply can't manage. And I had to revisit a situation that will sound crazy when I explain it, but perhaps there's somebody out there that will recognize their own family in this. My daughter, who has really severe gastrointestinal problems, has about this much options in terms of what she feels comfortable eating. So when she wants to eat something that's more heavy or full of protein, I usually will run out and jump on it and go straight out to wherever it is that she's asked me to go. So on this particular day, she woke up and said, I want Chipotle, and I said, okay, yay, protein, I'm gonna go. So I got in the car, drove down to Chipotle, which was maybe 5-10 minutes from my house, and when I was sitting in the parking lot, the gastroenterologist called with some test results that we've been waiting for a long time, and so I was delayed. So I was talking on the phone and getting all these notes and writing everything in my planner when my phone started to ping. I don't know if any of your phones do that, but when you're on the phone and someone's sending you text messages, it might shake a little bit. And I couldn't figure out why my phone was buzzing as much as it was, but this is what was going on. So I get off the phone with the gastro, and I look down at my phone, and there are probably 15 messages from my daughter Abby, who is in a full-on panic at home. Now Abby has fairly severe dysautonomia in POTS, and she is not upright very often. She usually crawls on all fours, she scoots down the stairs, and she typically uses a wheelchair to come and go from the house because standing upright she just can't maintain for a very long period of time. At this point, we had a 7-month-old boxer puppy who was very outgoing and friendly and cute, but somehow she had found a dying bird. I don't know how she got it because we didn't have a fence at that time, but she had this dying bird, and Abby, who is an avid bird watcher, started to freak out because she sees this dying bird and she sees her puppy who's wagging its tail and going crazy, and all she can think of is getting this dying bird away from her dog and trying to find an out for her. So what she did is she started chasing the dog on her hands and knees, chased her down the stairs, was crawling all over the house, was starting to lose breath. The dog, of course, thought this was game, chased after her, and eventually the dog dropped the bird. She went outside, and so Abby opened the front door to put the bird out on the front porch, and what would happen but, of course, the puppy shoots out the front door. So here's my dog out in the front yard, my daughter on her hands and knees, sobbing hysterically, calling the dog, can't chase after the dog. The workman across the street thinks she's crazy because she's sobbing and she's out of breath, but she can't move because she's completely paralyzed by POTS. And I am 15 minutes away on the phone, and I was just going to get her a burrito. So this is why I'm talking about superhuman parent. How do I not feel bad when my child can't be left alone for half an hour without that kind of catastrophe happening? It's horrible to not know from day to day if I'm going to be able to make it to Costco and back without having a massive tachycardia episode or a blood pressure crash or any number of problems that seem to come up with her. So what I did when Abby first got sick was what a lot of us do, and I'm spending a lot of time on the internet. And I was focused on finding a solution. I wanted to claim my daughter's life. She was starting university, she had her whole life ahead of her, and I thought if I could find the answer to her problem, she could start school. And maybe she'd lose a year, maybe she'd lose a semester, but it would be okay. So I would get started in the morning, give her shake, start my day, and the internet search would start. And I would postpone everything else, I would get caught up. I promised myself it would be half an hour, I turned it to 2. Or 3, or 4, and then it was late at night. I went through every forum, every study, everything I could get my hands on. And what ended up happening is Abby's illness started to consume me. It beat me down. And not surprisingly, I became depressed. I developed insomnia. I hated my life, and I resented being a caregiver. But I felt guilty because if I was letting my daughter down if I didn't try. Every time someone praised my strength or determination or my good cheer, I felt ashamed because I felt like I was living a lie. I had fallen victim to the myth of the parent as the superhero. I believe this myth may be one of the most insidious because it pours battery acid of shame over an already broken person. What I had to do was give myself a pass. I couldn't give all my emotional, physical, and intellectual energy to caregiving and still have room to feel guilty over eating chocolate cake for breakfast or skipping my physical therapy exercises. So many caregivers are breadwinners and single parents and can't waste their energy on guilt for being not all there for a child. Reclaim yourself. Do not forgo your personal identity or take on guilt for not being on your child's illness 24/7. One example of this was me in my writing career. My friends would ask me, when are you going to start writing again? When are you going to start writing again? I had put together multiple outlines for books when we lived overseas, and I had all these great ideas, and Abby was going to graduate, and then I was going to come in, and I was going to be a writer again. But Abby got sick just as we were transitioning back to the United States, and unfortunately, I was already out of the workforce. It was easy for me just kind of to fall into a pattern of just taking care of her. But I lost something, and I fell into that pattern that I talked about, the journey pattern, where I started procrastinating and saying, I'm not going to write because I don't have the emotional energy for it, or I can't start something because I might have to stop it. So I have put it off and put it off and put it off because I believed I had to be superhuman, and that's wrong. So we're talking about the roundabout, the circular nature of illness. Number 2, we are not superhuman, even though we think we should be. Now, the third myth that I want to talk about may be the hardest. And it probably is the most difficult to come up with a solution. But this is where I was. And maybe I'm the only person who felt this way. But I told myself this a lot. When my child has a diagnosis/explanation that I can explain, my family and friends will rally around me, and I will have the support I need to move forward. And the truth of this one is, I really wish I was wrong. But the truth is, it's a mixed bag. For at least the first year, I believed if I could just explain Abby's illness more clearly, or perhaps take a different angle, my family would start believing me, without me having to prove it. To their credit, my brother and my sister were awesome and trusted me even when the labs and the tests seemed to insist that Abby was normal. My parents didn't come around as easily. My mother kept insisting that if Abby would see her brilliant rheumatologist, that we would get a better answer and the rheumatologist would fix her. After all, he sees all those lupus patients and all those people with those weird diseases. I'm sure she'll be fine if you can just... No, I don't want to talk to a rheumatologist. My dad is a lawyer and a skeptic, and so trying to get him to buy into the idea that Abby was really sick and not having some overwrought form of exhaustion brought on by international moves, perpetual ill health, and being the overindulged youngest child was tough. We would sit there at lunch, and he would look at me and he would say, now explain this to me again, Heather. His dad was an anesthesiologist. He'd grown up in a medical home, and he was used to questioning. What I thought was uniquely my problem immediately kind of came to realize that it wasn't. When I talked to my online parent support group, who are wonderful, by the way, I discovered that almost every single one of them had a similar issue with family. A sister who couldn't understand why family reunions were skipped, a relative who assumed your kid was making it up. One of the sad ones was when a family came to visit and the sick child actually put forth an effort to participate in the family gathering. The sister at the end of the gathering came to the parent caregiver and said, I think you're just faking it because your kid is clearly fine. They were fine all weekend. And the parent, who is hysterical with grief by this point, is saying, do you understand she was in bed for 3 weeks after you left? Do you understand the price she paid to be normal for you for 3 days? So unfortunately, I don't think my situation is unique, as much as I wish it is. All of us with children with chronic illness live worrying that our child will be unjustly labeled as faking it, mentally ill, having a conversion disorder, or a psychosomatic illness. On the flip side, most parents with younger children live in fear of accusations of medical child abuse or Munchausen's. Being believed is huge. And that is why this myth is probably one of the hardest. That your family and friends will get it and they will rally around you, and they might. I tend to think that families and friends feel the most comfortable saying the things out loud that everyone else is too polite to say. They may unfairly take the brunt of your anger when there are likely others out there who agree with them that are just too polite to say so. Still, what do you do when you feel abandoned? I found a great support in my online support group. They helped me know I wasn't alone. I did discover that as I opened up and risked disapproval, that there were people who would pull me aside privately and tell me about their experiences with this diagnosis. They would tell me about their struggles with lupus or autoimmune disease or ME/CFS and their stigma that they dealt with. And I felt less alone with each person who would come to me. So sometimes the problem that we have with number 3 of not being believed is you will be eventually. By someone. Now, in my case, I think part of the problem is that there's a hierarchy of illnesses. Just like in the high school cafeteria where the teenage caste system rules, illness has a hierarchy too. Not surprisingly, at the top of the hierarchy is cancer. And that's because everyone knows what cancer is. Everyone knows what cancer looks like. Everyone knows someone who's had cancer. And it follows that linear journey that I was talking about. Diagnosis, treatment, outcome. The outcome isn't always known, but there's always an outcome. Either you respond to the chemotherapy or the radiation or you don't. Either you go into remission or you don't. But nonetheless, there is a very clean way of looking at cancer, which makes it very easy for society to accept it and believe it. My dad had cancer, my aunt and my grandfather died of cancer. I have nothing against cancer patients, except for the fact that everyone believes them. They just do. They get the benefit of the doubt. And most of us, with our kids, they don't get the benefit of the doubt. But what that means is that for people with invisible illness and chronic illnesses like the kinds our kids have, it takes often up to 5 or 6 years and sometimes hundreds of doctors before a child will get a proper diagnosis. And while that may not seem like a big deal when you're my age, well, it still kind of feels like a big deal when you're my age, the reality is 5 years for a 17-year-old is the time they graduate from high school to the time they graduate from college, and they lose that. So 5 years of not being believed is a big deal. And eventually, they get to the end of that 5 years, and some of them don't even believe themselves anymore. So this is a tremendous problem that we have. So what I would say is to find the people who believe you, whether it's your family, whether it's your neighbor, whether it's your online support group, whether it's your doctor. Find the people who believe you. I have a couple of friends who I call my chosen family who have been amazing. And they love me no matter what, and they will accept me in all my crazy. And that has saved me while it's taken the last 3 years for some of my family members to come around. Unfortunately, it basically took my daughter going to the Mayo Clinic for my dad to finally believe that she really had dysautonomia and POTS. That's what it took, was the validation of big mighty Mayo to say, wow, your daughter really is sick. It shouldn't have to go that far, but in some cases it does. So don't feel bad if this happens to you. Don't be frustrated, don't be upset. You will be believed eventually. Now the last one I want to talk about is the myth of the saintly patient. And the reason why I thought of this is I was recently talking to a mother whose child has been sick with ME/CFS, among other things, for 10 years. And I consider her one of my heroes. She is an absolutely amazing person. I consider her kind of like the mother superior of some of us, because she really is so far and above, at least in my mind. I'm buying into this superhuman thing with her. But I was sitting down talking to her about her experience, and she told me that sometimes when her son gets upset, he throws things at her. And she gets so mad, she chews him out, and she walks out of the room, and she's fuming. And I just was shocked. I'm like, oh, saintly Mother Superior Mom just told me that she gets mad at her kid, who is also the saintly patient, who throws things at her. And I thought about it, and I asked her about it, and I said, do you think some of us look at our sick kids and we expect more of them because they're sick than we would of a child who was just throwing a 16-year-old temper tantrum? Do you think we expect them to bear things with patience and with good humor and to have a good attitude? Is that a stigma that sometimes we buy into? Because I'm a fiction writer, I immediately go to fiction for my examples, and the first thing that came to mind was Beth March in Little Women. Sweet, lovely, saintly, kindly Beth March, who has a beautiful dying scene. She is amazing, and we all look at her and go, oh, Beth, poor sad Beth. More contemporary, in John Green's The Fault in Our Stars, which unfortunately came out the same year my daughter got sick, and she has nothing but hostile feelings for him because of that. His heroine, a cancer sufferer named Hazel Grace Lancaster, is smart, perceptive, wise beyond her years, and tragically fated to die. She has terminal thyroid cancer. And even though Hazel has her quirks and her rough spots, the fact is, at the end of the day, she's a heroine that all of us would love to be. We would all love to be as smart and insightful and wonderful as Hazel Grace Lancaster. But for me, a better frame of reference is from The Secret Garden. And I don't even know if people are still reading that book, but there is a great scene in The Secret Garden where young orphan Mary Lennox, who has come to Yorkshire from India, is awoken in the middle of the night by her cousin, who is chronically ill, who is screaming hysterically in the other room and waking up everybody in the entire manor house. And Mary has had enough, and she stomps out of her bed, and she runs over to Colin's room, and she screams at him and tells him to stop. I am not putting up with this anymore. And the reason why I love that scene is because I think most of us parents with chronically ill children probably have those moments when we want to yell at our kid. Just like Mary yells at Colin, perhaps not that violently as a 10-year-old girl would, but nonetheless, if my daughter asks me one more time to go down the stairs because I didn't bring her the right water bottle, or I forgot the ketchup, or I really didn't put enough sauce on the orange chicken, can you please just go back and get it for me? And you're going up, and you're going down, and you're going up, and you're going down, and you get one paragraph into the page that you're reading, and Mom, and how can you possibly resent the child who's sick? And so that becomes tough. And so I started to ask myself, do I have different expectations of my daughter than I would have of one of my other 3 daughters, her older sister? If one of my other 3 daughters behaved the way Abby was behaving last Tuesday when we were in a hotel room in Rochester, Minnesota, and she was going off her medication for an autonomic test and was insane. When I say insane, I pretty much had to hold her by the shoulders and say, do I need to lock the windows and doors? Because are you going to throw yourself out if I go out and get some ice from the ice machine? She was so crazy. And I'm not exaggerating. She'll agree with you when I tell you that. But nonetheless, it helped me to kind of say, wouldn't all of us behave that way in that situation? Why would I expect her to be any different? So I asked my daughter to explain how this myth harms her. And here are some of her responses. Her first answer was, I can't be real. I feel obligated to play the part of a sick person, whether that is changing the type of conversation I can have or what I choose to wear. I feel like sometimes I have to play a role. She actually talked about how sometimes when she was going to see a doctor for the first time, she felt like she couldn't dress up the way she normally would because she was afraid that if she put makeup on and put nice clothes on, that the doctor would think that she wasn't really sick. So she felt like she had to play the sick person in order to be believed. And that's terrible, but it's true. And that's one of the challenges of invisible illness, is you don't look sick. And this is a big one, and I think as caregivers, I can relate to this one too. She said, I feel responsible to make other people comfortable with my illness. To reassure them, this especially includes family members who want to believe I'm getting better or that my situation is changing. She said, I put on an act sometimes so they can walk away from me feeling better. She was specifically talking about a family dinner that we had at Hires back in July. She hadn't seen her grandparents for a while, and so we met, and she said, okay, I'm going to eat my protein, I'm going to get a big H, and she came away from that experience saying, I feel so awful, I'm not going to be out of bed for the next 3 days. My dad came away from that saying, wow, she looks so good, she must be doing better. And really, Abby said, after that dinner, she said, I felt like I needed to make him feel better. I felt like I needed to play the role of being the good, patient, long-suffering, sick person. That I couldn't really say, you really want to know how I feel today? Let's talk about dry mouth and dry eyes and bowels that don't work. And let's talk about the fact that I can't stand up without tipping over. And the fact that all my friends are going on study abroads and they're doing things and going places, and I'm stuck at home watching The Price is Right, wishing that I had one of those things that the old people use to go up and down the stairs. She's like, I watch that show and I relate more to the senior citizens and the Medicaid patients than I do to my peers. She hates September because that's when everyone goes back to school and they take all the pictures. Look at me in my new dorm. Look at me in my sorority. La 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 la. Hates it. Will not go on social media. She started blocking people. I hate them, I hate them, I hate them, I hate them. It was great. She said it was very therapeutic. One of the things she said about feeling obligated to be saintly was, I close myself off from people who either see me as a stereotype or who want to use me as inspiration porn. Now, I don't know if you know the phrase inspiration porn, but it's that idea of you watch those YouTube videos of some sick person doing something noble, and you just put your hand over your heart and go, oh, that's so sweet. What a nice sick person. And it makes you feel better. the healthy person, to see that that sick person is just soldiering on. Well, Abby hates that. She hates it when her friends come to visit her so they can check off the list, I went and visited a sick person today. It makes her really mad because she feels like they're not coming to see her, they're coming to make themselves feel better. Her best friend in the world is a young woman from England who she met in her last 2 years of high school when we were in Germany. And the reason why Jess and Abby get along so well is because Jess had dengue fever twice and almost died. And Jess also was born with a genetic disease that means that her bones will collapse and she will likely be in a wheelchair by the time she's 32 years old. She has a form of osteoporosis that will likely end up taking her life. So she understands what it's like to be sick. And she understands what it's like to spend time in the hospital, and she knows what it's like to have people look at you with pity in their eyes, and you don't want to have anything to do with that. So Jess is the one person in the world that Abby can talk to that loves her just as she is. And if Abby's being difficult, Jess tells her she's being difficult. But at the same time, Jess can offer sympathy that very few people can, and empathy. So this myth of the saintly or perfect patient hurts other family members as well. I've talked to parents, this is less situation because my daughter's the youngest, whose siblings represent the perfect sick child. Because who can be mad at a sick person, especially when the sick sibling contributes very little to the housework, or taking out the dog, or cleaning up the yard, or participating? Why, they intellectually understand it, but every once in a while they get really tired of having to take on more dish nights and more jobs and running more errands because the sick child can't. So this whole myth of saintliness and sickness, whether it's a parent or whether it's a child, is insanely destructive because we stop being who we really are, we step into a role, and we stop being true to ourselves in a way that I believe ultimately leads us to being depressed, to being sad, to being resentful, and being angry. So there's my buzzer telling me I'm almost done. So this is where, and I'm actually right at the end, so this works out. For me, I tried to think about where you go after you talk about exploding these myths. The idea that illness is a roundabout, that you keep going round and around and around. The idea that caregivers are not superhuman. The idea that being believed is such an ordeal and finding community is so hard. And the fourth one is the saint and what that costs a family when we buy into that. One of Abby's neurologists, yes, she has 4 of them, said it very well last week. And anyone who thinks that neurologists are just unfunny, not very pleasant humans that are all wonky and academic hasn't spent time with some of Abby's neurologists. They're pretty awesome. But one of her neurologists said to her, you have to fight this illness, not because you're going to win, because if you don't, it will define you, and you will become your illness. You will become the sick person instead of the person who is sick. And the semantics of that may be a little bit tricky, but the reality is there is a difference between being the person who is sick than the person who is the sick person. My daughter, Abigail, is a 20-year-old woman who is sick. She is not sick Abigail, because when that illness takes over your life, when everything you do, everything you are, everything you breathe, it crowds you out. It's like being smothered. It's like one of those plants in Little Shop of Horrors that comes in and swallows you whole. And before you know it, you're no longer a person, you're a disease, and you're a definition. And this doctor looked at my daughter and said, you have to fight this because you don't want to be your disease. And I would say that the myths of parenting children with chronic illness are the same. You have to get past the stereotypes, you have to get past the myths, because you don't want to be the sick family. You want to be the family that has a chronically ill child. You deserve an identity, your family deserves an identity. Your children deserve an identity. Your extended family deserves an identity. And simply existing to be sick is not a life worth living. For every person, it will take on a different form. It may be as simple as picking up a book and reading something that has nothing to do with your kid's sickness. It may going for a drive, or adopting pets, or doing whatever it is that makes you happy. But find your way back from being strangled by the illness. Take your life back. Become the person who is affected by illness, not the person who is the illness. And that, to me, is what this is all about. Thank you.
So, does anyone have any questions? Q&A. Anyone want to have a question for Heather? Okay. I have a question.
Yeah.
Maybe it's kind of a comment, but I can relate to a lot of what you said. I have a child who has chronic illness, and gosh, it took a long time to get the diagnosis. Typical story, but I became consumed with her illness and spent a lot of time researching and being on the internet. And I think I'm at that point, well, I have been for a while, where I finally accepted the illness and that it is a chronic illness.
Right.
And once I accepted that and came out of that, just as you've said, then now I do things for me. I always do things for her as well. I mean that, but
Oh, yeah.
it's just a whole different.
Well,
it's just a whole different.
and I would say that I would still say 75 to 80% of my time is still taking care of my daughter. It's not that I've walked away from that, but what I have realized is that being a professional caregiver that never took a break to think about anything else but sickness was killing me. It was killing my relationships with my friends, the ones that still spoke to me, and it was destroying my outlook, and it was preventing me from really finding joy. And now I feel like I can separate it. And I feel like what's happened, at least with me and my daughter, is we've kind of developed this honesty policy where she looks at me and I'm like, okay, are you telling me the truth, or are you just telling me what I want to hear? And she'll look at me and she'll go, I'm telling you what you want to hear. And I'm like, okay, then walk it back and tell me the truth. Because if this is really bothering you, then you need to tell me why, and you can't be careful about my feelings. And as a consequence of this honesty policy, we kind of started, like last week, she had a really rough autonomic test where she was in a thermoregulatory sweat test. Maybe you know what that is, where you're covered with powder from head to toe and stuck in a chamber and heated up to 100 and something degrees for up to 40 minutes or so in order to see if you have any neuropathies, to see if your body sweats. So she comes out of there after 4 days, 3 days of not really eating any meals because she has no appetite, sicker than a dog, purple from head to toe, and she can't stand because she's got POTS and dysautonomia, and she's sitting in the corner of the shower trying to get this off her. And I'm kind of trying to help her, and she's like, Mom, just take my hospital gown off and wash me off. She said, we're past the point of modesty at this stage. So you're not going to hurt my feelings. Just do it. And so for me, it was kind of like, okay, symbolically, we're there. We're finally there where it's like, it is what it is. We're not going to hide. And I'm sure we still do protect each other. But I think it's helped a lot to kind of strip away some of these ideas. Comments? Like I said.
All right, I guess it's a wrap. Thank you so much, Heather, for talking with our group, and it was very insightful and very honest and from the heart. So thank you. We appreciate that very much. Thank you.
Great.